Ready to begin? Ma Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Shunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This is the beginning of a long series of personalities from Ramayana. A little background. The inspiration for this came from the Kartik Yatras that I've been conducting for a number of years. 25, 30, 35, whatever the number of years is. And devotees were asking, can we go to Ayodhya? And then it became Ayodhya and Chitrakoot, so we went. And not being familiar with Ramayana, it was a lot of preparation and wonderful exploration. So the first two khandas of Ramayana were discussed, Balakanda and Ayodhya Kanda. And then came the enthusiasm, let's go to the next two khandas, Kishkinda Kanda, Aranya Kanda and Kishkinda Kanda. So we did that. Then the pandemic came, and the idea then evolved, rather than just continuing with the different khandas, wouldn't it be nice if there could be some discussion on the various personalities of Ramayana? And so that's what we're doing. The focus is the personalities. And so there are multiple personalities in the drama, Amber Leela, of Lord Ramachandra. And I thought a nice way to introduce this topic is to introduce Ramayana, specifically starters Valmiki Ramayana, and then we'll expand a bit, as you will see shortly. In ISKCON, we're most familiar with Srimad Bhagavatam. And the reason for our familiarity with Srimad Bhagavatam is the emphasis given to Srimad Bhagavatam by Lord Chaitanya and his followers, with the understanding that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the ripened fruit of all Vedic literature. So we focus on Srimad Bhagavatam. Naturally, in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is discussion of Lord Ramachandra. And in the discussion about Lord Ramachandra, Shukadeva Goswami says, I will only speak about those authorized renderings of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, which means two things. There was more than one. Presentations of Lord Ramachandra's pastimes, and two, there were authorized and unauthorized ones. And that was during the time of Lord Chaitanya, during the time of Vyasadeva and Shukadeva Goswami. Since then, many other Ramayanas have been composed, yet the gold standard of Ramayana is Valmiki's Ramayana. Much like For followers of Lord Chaitanya, there's elaborate commentary on the various cantos of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord and his devotees and his incarnations in the Bhagavatam. There's elaborate commentary by the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas because they view the pastimes of Ram and Valmiki Ramayana specifically as a treatise of surrender. And we're going to touch on that topic as perhaps the main theme of this morning's class. As we know, the Sri Sampradaya has its preceptor or founder as Ramanujacharya. And Ramanujacharya, although he didn't directly hear from Yamunacharya, Ramanujacharya specifically with Ramayana heard from what who heard from Yamunacharya about Ramayana. Sri Shailapurna was Ramanujacharya's uncle. And Ramanujacharya went to Tirupati, walked up the hill of Tirupati. He went specifically to take Sri Shailapurna's association and hear from him what were the teachings of Yamunacharya on Ramayana. And for some period of time, similar to our Gaudiya tradition, like Sanatana Goswami heard for 2 months, every day, from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, gave him instructions in bhakti. Then later he wrote books about the science of bhakti. Similarly, Sri Shailapurna gave instructions that he received from Yamunacharya on Ramayana to Ramanujacharya. And then Ramanujacharya in turn disseminated those same teachings. And those teachings were recorded extensively by various commentators in Sri Sampradaya, but especially prominent amongst the commentators is an acharya who came much later than Ramanujacharya. Govindaraj, will hear his name several times as we're going along. In his extensive commentary on Ramayana, he gathered teachings from previous acharyas. He was very like Krishnadas Kaviraj is for the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the life of Lord Chaitanya. Govindaraj was such a person, great person. And he recorded the most extensive commentary on Ramayana of all. And in that commentary of Govindaraj, he presents 18 primary teachings, cardinal teachings, cardinal lessons, which is one of the handouts that you should have. We'll be touching on that in our class this morning or tomorrow morning. All of this is just to give us a background on Ramayana and the personalities of Ramayana as a subset of Ramayana. There's a handout sheet that you have, a PDF, that gives phala, stuti, short statements or prayers indicating the fruit of hearing Ramayana. Here's one that comes directly from Srimad Bhagavatam, spoken by Vyas. O King Parikshit, anyone who orally received the narrations concerning the characteristics of Lord Ramachandra's pastimes will ultimately be freed from the disease of envy and thus be liberated from the bondage of fruitive activities. So in the future, if anybody asks you the question, how do I become free from envy, you'll have the answer. Your Ramayana. And the narrations concerning the characteristics of Lord Ramachandra's pastime. Now in your own time, in your own leisure, you can go through this document that you have on other statements directly primarily from Uttarakhanda of Ramayana. The benefits to be derived from hearing and reciting and remembering the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra. Now you'll notice as you go through, as it's occasionally found in the Bhagavatam, there's some benefits that are on the material side, because the reader of Ramayana may not have been fully transcendental and may have been aspiring through piety, through the merit of hearing Lord Ramachandra's pastimes, benefits that are in the limited and temporary range. Those will also come, because ultimately from spiritual well-being, material well-being follows. So what is the Ramayana? That's the Palastuti. What is it? There's a phrase given by Madhvacharya called Mula Ramayana. Mula means root. Root. The original Ramayana, composed of 100 crore, that's 1 billion slokas, was given by Lord Hayagriva to Brahma, who then passed it on to Narada. Just like the Vedas are eternal, Ramayana is eternal. I'll say it again because it's important. The composition of Ramayana by Valmiki was his own, but the Mula Ramayana, the root Ramayana, the original text of Ramayana, is eternal. As Ram is eternal, the record of Ram's activities is eternal, and is 1 billion verses. That's a lot of verses. Brahma received it. Brahma gave it to Narada. And in Valmiki Ramayana, Narada summarized it in the very beginning of Valmiki Ramayana in just 74 verses. It's within the Ramayana, there's a telling and retelling and retelling and telling again. So many times retelling in shorter versions of the whole of the Ramayana. It's just the nature of the composition. And after Narada spoke the summary of Ramayana to Valmiki, Valmiki composed 24,000 Sanskrit verses. That's the length of Valmiki Ramayana that stems from the Mula Ramayana. Something noteworthy about the Ramayana and Valmiki's writing is there's a particular meter called Anushtup that he composed in, and it's set to standard for compositions following him, like the same meter as Bhagavad Gita's meter. At least it is understood amongst Vaishnavas that Valmiki originated this meter. And other than Ramayana, within the text of Valmiki Ramayana, there's an indication by Valmiki that he also intended the book to be called Sita Charita. It's the blind pastimes of Sita. And Paulascha Vadha. Paulascha because Ravana was the son of one who is in the line of Paulascha Muni. So Paulascha Vadha, the killing of Ravana. In our disciplic line, Madhvacharya, in his Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra commentary commented on 113, Shastra Yonitvat. We know the first two sutras. This is Sutra number 3. And here's his commentary, Madhvacharya. The Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharva Veda, Mahabharata, Pancharatra, and the original Mula Ramayana are all Vedic literatures. Any literature following the conclusive statements of these Vedic literatures is also to be considered Vedic literature. That literature which does not conform to Vedic literature is simply misleading. Note, although Ramayana and Mahabharata are itihasas or histories, they're Vedic literatures. The original Mula Ramayana is Vedic literature, is as Vedic as Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda. In Tattva Sandarbha, there was some discussion recently. In Tattva Sandarbha, text number 12 through 15, there's a very detailed explanation that Jiva Goswami renders to explain that the Puranas are as Vedic as the 4 Vedas. And many, it's a long section of Tattva Sandarbha, including Gopi Puranadanda's commentary, which is a summation of Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary and some extracts even from Jiva Goswami's commentary on Tattva Sandarbha. The point being, they are as Vedic as the celebrated 4 Vedas, stated by the 4 Vedas. It's an interesting section of Tattva Sandarbha. So they're Vedic literature. And conformity with them is also Vedic literature, and the opposite, simply misleading. This discussion this morning is to give us a picture of Ramayana, because the topic is personalities from Ramayana. So what's Ramayana from an objective point of view? Ramayana has vast poetic language that lends itself to multiple layers of understandings and inspirations and renderings. That's what poetry does. And one of the commentators mentioned already, this is Govindaraj. He indicated that the 7 khandas of Ramayana are ornaments, because the title of his commentary is Alankar. The ornaments of Ramayana is his commentary, because the book is the Lord. Just like we know the Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary form of Krishna. So here it shows 6 on the left, 6 on the right, and they correspond with the limbs of the Lord. And his commentary, he gives names of different ornaments decorating the form of the Lord, or decorating Ramayana. Mani, manjira, jeweled anklets, which are meant to decorate his lotus feet. And the second khanda, Ayodhya khanda, pitambar, this yellow cloth that covers his legs. Aranya khanda commentary, he calls ratna, mekhala, a jeweled belt for his waist. Again, this is the commentary is decorating the body of Lord Ramachandra, which is Ramayana, non-different. Kishkindya khanda commentary is mukta, hara, mukta hara. Pearl necklace in his neck. Sundarakanda. His commentary is called Shingara Tilak, the elegant tilak for his forehead, where it's doing deity dressing, through his commentary. Yuta is Ratna, Kirita, gem-studded crown for his head. And finally, Mani Mukuta, Mukut, Mani Mukuta, jewel top piece for the crown on his head. So he saw himself, in writing his commentary, as just giving ornaments or decorations for the body of the Lord, and the body of the Lord is understood as being Ramayana, the Lord and his ornaments. So far, the focus has been upon Valmiki Ramayana, but there's a PDF. I think you'll find it pretty amazing. I find it pretty amazing that Ramayana is so popular, not only in India, prior to Valmiki Ramayana, or prior to Srimad Bhagavatam for that matter. There's many, many, many Ramayanas. Many, many, many Ramayanas. And if you have your PDF handy, you can see this Mula Ramayana is the 1 billion verses. Adbhuta Ramayana is Valmiki's Ramayana. This is how commentators often describe. And then there's a long list. Adhyatma Ramayana is celebrated. Adhyatma Ramayana is said to be from Brahmanda Purana. Adhyatma Ramayana is said to be Adhyatma Ramayana. No, it's because something has the name Ramayana doesn't mean it's Ramayana. Just like something that says Bhagavad Gita can be gobbledygook. But this Adhyatma Ramayana is reasonably considered authentic because two evidences. Sanatana Goswami refers to it. That makes very strong piece of evidence. And Srila Prabhupada, right within his Chaitanya Charitamrita commentary, referring presumably to also Bhakti Siddhanta and Bhakti Siddhanta following Bhakti Vinod Thakur. I'm going to read what Prabhupada writes in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chapter 9, verse number 12, about Adhyatma Ramayana. In the book known as Adhyatma Ramayana, there are statements in chapters 12 to 15 about worshipping the deities of Sri Ramachandra and Sita. There it is stated that during Lord Ramachandra's time, there was a Brahmana who took a vow to fast until he saw Lord Ramachandra. That was his daily practice. He wouldn't take his meal until he saw Lord Ramachandra, then he would break his fast. Sometimes, due to business, Lord Ramachandra was absent from his capital for a full week and could not be seen by the citizens during that time because of his vow. The Brahmana would not take even a drop of water during that week. Later, after 8 or 9 days, when the Brahmana could see Lord Ramachandra personally, he would break his fast. Upon observing the Brahmana's rigid vow, Lord Ramachandra ordered his younger brother Lakshmana to deliver a pair of Sitaram deities to the Brahmana. The Brahman received the deities from Sri Lakshmanji and worshipped them faithfully as long as he lived. At the time of his death, he delivered the deities to Sri Hanumanji, who for many years hung them around his neck and served them with all devotion. Now, according to Adhyatma Ramayana, when Hanuman departed on the hill known as Ganda Madana, now that's not in Valmiki Ramayana, but Adhyatma Ramayana, he departed, he delivered the deities to Bhimasena, one of the Pandavas, and Bhimasena brought them to his palace, where he kept them very carefully. The last king of the Pandavas, Kshema Kanta, worshipped the deities in that place. Later, the same deities were kept in the custody of the kings of Orissa known as Gajapatis, one of the acharyas, known as Narahari Tirtha, who was in the disciplic succession of Madhvacharya, received these deities from the king of Orissa. Paragraph. It may be noted that these particular deities of Rama and Sita have been worshipped from the time of King Ikshvaku. Indeed, they were worshipped by the royal princes even before the appearance of Lord Ramachandra. Later, during Ramachandra's presence, the deities were worshipped by Lakshmana. It is said just 3 months before his first appearance, Sri Madhvacharya received these deities and installed them in the Udupi temple. Since then, the deities have been worshipped by the Madhvacharya Sampradaya at that monastery. As far as Sri Vaishnavas are concerned, beginning with Ramanujacharya, they also worship deities of Sitaram. Sitaram deities are also being worshipped in Tirupati and other places. From the Sri Ramanuja Sampradaya, there is another branch known as Ramanandi or Ramat, and the followers of that branch also worship the deities of Sitaram very richly. Ramanuja Sampradaya Vaishnavas for the worship of Lord Ramachandra, for that of Radha Krishna. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, Chapter 9. Evidence that the Adhyatma Ramayana is authentic, and the detail in that Adhyatma Ramayana that deity worship of Ram was there even before Ram appeared. Now, of course, those who were in Ayodhya didn't recognize Ram as the personality of Godhead. There's some details about this. Are there places in Valmiki Ramayana where it came to the attention of Dasarata that Lord Ramachandra was the personality of Godhead? There's 2 places without the detail. He didn't seem to accept it. But Adhyatma Ramayana is one of the authentic Ramayanas. There are some differences between Adhyatma Ramayana and Valmiki Ramayana. One of them being the false Sita was taken, which is in Adhyatma Ramayana, not in Valmiki Ramayana. And other subsequent acharyas. You see your PDF here of various Ramayanas. Tulsi Das's Ramcharita Manas also has that detail. And the PDF you have, it gives a whole list of some of the distinctions between one Ramayana and the other Ramayana. Some scholars have gone through it very meticulously. And if some of you may be interested, you can go through to see how they're different. There was a Tamil poet, Kamba, who wrote Kamba Ramayana, and there are passages within Kamba Ramayana that differ from the passages of Valmiki Ramayana, but it's a well-known in South India and popular Ramayana. There's a Bengali poet named Krittivasa, and Krittivasi Ramayana, another celebrated Ramayana. Now, I didn't know all these things before I started diving into the Ramayana, but I could go through the list. You can go through the list yourself. We're going to make some reference to Ananda Ramayana, and Skanda Purana makes there's a long Ramayana section within Skanda Purana, as within the Bhagavatam, a few chapters on Ramachandra. It's not called Ramayana, the Bhagavatam, but it's the pastimes and activities and qualities and forms and associates of Lord Ramachandra as Ramayana does. There's this Ananda Ramayana that's in the upper list, that there's scholars differ. Some say it's directly from Valmiki himself. In addition to Valmiki Ramayana, he wrote this Ananda Ramayana, and it's a discussion, and some say no. You know how scholars differ. A 15th century poet. In any case, it's a discussion between Lord Shiva and Uma, discussing about pastimes of Lord Ramachandra. And the list goes on. Those are some of the prominent and primary Ramayanas. There's others that you've heard the names perhaps. Those of you from India, you may have heard some of these names, may even prefer some of these. Champu Ramayana by Olga. Raghu Vangsam by Kalidas. Anyway, Bhavabhuti, Jayadev, Hanuman, Agnivesha, etc. Have all Hima, Chandra. These are celebrated personalities in the history of Vaishnavism that had such a fascination with the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra that they wrote a Ramayana. They're not just commentary. They wrote a Ramayana from beginning to end. And the list goes on. I find it very interesting that in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Japan, and other countries like that, they also have their Ramayana. I mean, it's not surprising in one sense. But I had this experience in searching for images connected with Ram pastimes. There's many beautiful pieces of artwork from Southeast Asia depicting Ram's pastimes, of course, depicting Krishna's pastimes as well, but there's a great fascination for Ram's pastimes. So the point being, we celebrate. We celebrate. And Ramayana is celebrated. And circling back, our gold standard is Valmiki. Now, if something that's in another Ramayana, it's not in Valmiki Ramayana, doesn't mean bogus or wrong or, mythology or dismiss it or something like that. There's an understanding, these deeply, profoundly deep worshippers of Ramayana have some realization, or Lord Ram reveals things to them. Now, this is with the assumption that it's not on the unauthorized category. I'm speaking of those that our Vaishnava acharyas recognize as authorized versions of Ramayana. So how are there discrepancies? Well, one way to understand those discrepancies is different days of Brahma. So different Ramayanas with different pastimes. Possible explanation, it's not confirming, but a possible explanation is different days of Brahma. And there's variety in the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra in different days of Brahma. Another explanation can simply be the Lord is unlimited and reveals himself to his loving devotees in different ways. They record according to what's revealed to them. A standard text that our devotees, ISKCON devotees, Gaudiya devotees refer to is from Brahma Samhita. Yadrashi Shraddha Siddhi Bhavati Tadrashi. Yadrashi Shraddha. According to faith, Siddhi Bhavati. Bhakti Siddhanta's translation is realization arises. Tadrashi. Siddhi Bhavati. So they have these devotees of Lord Ramachandra, they have a relationship, profound relationship with Lord Ramachandra, and he reveals things to them. This is the fruit of our bhakti life, and they're at the stage of tasting the fruits, the authorized one. And because there are many people that we don't need to talk about, but they're just creative writers. We're not interested in creative writers. We're interested in the authorized ones. So the question is, how is there differences? Because the Lord has a relationship with them, and they have a relationship with the Lord. And Lord Ramachandra may reveal different things in different times to different people. It doesn't mean if this is right, then that's wrong, or if that's wrong, that's right, then this is wrong. Not like that. For the authorized ones, they're imparted realizations, and they're impelled to share their realizations with the Lord and their writings. And so they do. Now that can be misused by unqualified people, but this is an explanation of how it happens with qualified people. I want to read something I think you'll find interesting. Padyavali is a collection of verses, you can say some of his favorite verses of Rupa Goswami. Padyavali, that's what it is. And one of the verses that he enters into Padyavali is text 151. The Sanskrit translates this way. Yashoda narrates to Krishna. There was once a king named Rama. Yes, Yashoda. His wife is Sita. Yes, Yashoda. On the order of his father, Ram lived in the Panchavati forest. There, Ravana kidnapped Sita. As Lord Krishna heard his mother narrate his own activities performed in ancient times, he suddenly called out, Lakshmana, where is my bow? Where is my bow? Where is my bow? I pray these alarmed words of Lord Krishna may protect you all. Now that is a stanza quoted by Rupa Goswami in Padyavali, author unknown. So, in his own way, one of the ways in which Rupa Goswami is indicating Rama and Krishna are the same person, just different forms at different times, etc. He's included in Valmiki, in Padyavali. It's very poetic and beautiful way. And as you see, Gopal Company Upanishad also makes a connection between the two. Gopal Company Upanishad reads, one of the meanings of the Gopal Company Upanishad sloka, Yo Sao Saurya Tishtati, is given by Sanatana Goswami. So here's Sanatana Goswami explaining or translating that verse from Gopal Company. Lord Krishna is the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who formerly appeared in the Surya, that's the Sanskrit of Saurya, who formerly appeared in the Surya Vangsha with Lord Ram. That's Sanatana Goswami's rendering of Gopal Company. Rupa Goswami writes in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, referring to this verse from Gopal Company Upanishad, Surya in the above verse can also refer to Sauri, daughter of the sun, indicating the Yamuna River. Yamuna River is the daughter of the sun. And thus, Vrindavan, which is close to the Yamuna, Saurya, thus, he exists as the soul of Vrindavan. Those are just some references. Of course, they're poetic and they're beautiful. But Rama and Krishna, or hearing Ramayana, we can understand this is one of Krishna's forms. Ramadi Murti Shakala Niyamena Tishtan, etc. Govindamadi Krishna. Namaham Bhajami. Rama is one of the incarnations or forms of Krishna. Ramayana is in the category of Smriti, and Smriti has these two categories. Smriti means, commonly explained as, Smriti is an explanation of the Shrutis. Now, I've already given you a reference where, if you want, you can find how the Smritis are as Vedic as the Shrutis. Very extensive. Very extensive. And the Smritis include both the Puranas and the Itihasas. Commonly understood about that a distinction between the Puranas and Itihasas is Itihasas, by rule, they're chronological. And the Puranas, by rule, they're not. Something here is later explained over there, later is explained over there, and so forth. That's the Puranas. But another distinction of the Itihasas is it's primarily centered on one story. Like in Mahabharata, the Pandavas, and in Krishna. And in Ramayana, it's one story is the life of Ramachandra. Now, that one story has its many, many, many other multiple stories that embellish it. So many examples of the embellishments of the one story, like Vishwamitra Muni giving histories of so many things to Rama and Lakshmana as they're traveling together in the forest. Or in the final section of Ramayana, where Agastya gives so many, 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 many different histories connected to the one history. one main story about the life of Ramachandra. And both of them, but particularly the Itihasas, they're known for and composed for being sung. Just take Ramayana. You'll see it when we get to Valmiki Ramayana, excuse me, to the personality of Valmiki. One of the slides shows Valmiki training the two, Love and Kush, to sing. And commonly, not always, but there's two singers. And one sings, the other listens, and then the one who's listening asks the question, and the one singing. So it's meant to be sung, and there's a kind of like a back and forth, and sometimes it's like a duet. And it's meant for singing. And in this way, people that weren't literate could hear it again and again, and hear it again and again, and hear it again and again. And people like music. I mean, I'm amazed. I don't know about all of you, but I'm amazed when I go somewhere and hear this bebop music, and the people that are hearing the bebop music, they know all the lyrics of the bebop music. Whether it's rap music or, something or something, it's part of culture that people learn lyrics, songs. But when the song is about the personality of Godhead, and it's meant to be sung, and it's back and forth, people would learn, even they weren't literate. And they would go deeply by repeating it again and again. That was the culture, the system of passing on sound vibration of the personality of Godhead. So Love and Kush, one example. Jiva Goswami uses the same model in his composition of Gopal Champu. Gopal Champu is a narration of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan by two disciples of Narada Muni named Snigdhakanta and Madhukanta. And it's the same. Champu has its own style. Sometimes it's narration, sometimes it's refrain, sometimes it's story, sometimes there's some rules about Champu, but it's meant for being sung. There are sections where it says phrases that are meant to be sung. Or another example is our Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. One of his celebrated arts was he would recite the Srimad Bhagavatam by singing it. And he would sing it with different melodies and different meters, and he was a connoisseur of how to sing Srimad Bhagavatam. And Vrindavan Das Thakur also composed Chaitanya Bhagavat with that view in mind. Not so much philosophy, but it's wonderful description filled with feeling, meant to be sung, and accompanied with beautiful instruments. Now the Ramayana in particular has many, and the embellishing stories or additional stories are very poetic, and by nature poetry invites layers of meaning. There may be a primary meaning of a poet who writes something, and there may be multiple secondary meanings. And commentators on Ramayana take a look at the poetry of Ramayana, and they render meanings in different ways, and it's natural because they're simply relishing the eternal Ramayana compiled by Valmiki in 24,000 verses that gives not only a story of Lord Ramachandra's life, but many lessons, many implications, many teachings to guide people's lives. And one of the primary virtues of Ramayana, those who read it, is one to abide by virtue. Because circumstance of life has its challenges. We're not going to have time to this morning's class. We'll spend some time tomorrow morning's class on sorrow, the mood of sorrow. That's the prevailing mood, the whole of Ramayana. So when there's challenging circumstances, there's a natural emotion, sorrow. I mean, not everyone feels sorrow when there's challenges. Some people just go on. But no matter what the life circumstances, teaching the Ramayana is, does, he teaches it when those persons forget it by virtue. So one of the byproducts of a culture that familiarizes itself and even lives by Ramayana is you have then a culture that abides by virtue. And then you know what virtue is. It's in the Ramayana. The force, the compelling force to live that way is within Ramayana. Now, there's different ideas of what virtue is also. But Valmiki Ramayana provides us with that gold standard. And there's many other levels of what those standards are. You can take, there's many examples of a king or a person, how to offer respect to anyone and everyone. That's a virtue. And what it looks like, and hear it again and again and again. It practically, it impels one to abide by virtue, and it creates a population, hearers, a population of virtuous individuals, at least more so than they would have been without having heard Ramayana. So, back to the bebop music, that's the culture that we have, bebop culture. Whatever people say in their bebop music is what people live by. And it's not, a lot of it is anger, not just bebop. A lot of modern so-called music is anger music. Without going into it, it doesn't elevate consciousness. Sound vibration elevates consciousness. And this sound vibration, because it's so principled, so fundamental to Valmiki Ramayana, that it inspires those who read it to abide by virtue, and to mean it, to know the difference between the two. On this topic of the treatise of surrender, a nice image, isn't it? There's the lotus feet of Lord Ramachandra, and surrender to the lotus feet of Lord Ramachandra is what Ramayana is. And as mentioned already, there are 18 cardinal lessons from the whole of Ramayana, and directly or indirectly, they're related to surrender. Now, you should have another PDF that has the heading 18 cardinal lessons. And we can spend a little bit of time going through cardinal lessons. I have some notes here. The version that you have, that's 18 cardinal lessons, is 4 pages. And the version that I have is with notes. So I gave you the essential ones because this is what Govindaraj provides, his commentary on Ramayana. Now it indicates where it comes from. The fifth sarga of Balakanda. So the kanda is like a canto. Even Prabhupada spoke specifically in those terms. There are 7 cantos, 7 khandas. But for the first of those khandas, Balakanda, the division, chapter this and that, is called sargas. In the fifth sarga of Balakanda, Govindaraj presents these. This PDF. We'll start at the top. Sharanagati, or surrender to the Supreme Lord, is the means to attain the absolute truth. Ramayana is an elaborate explanation of Sharanagati. That's the first teaching. And it kind of pervades all the other 17. One way or another. Now there are persons that didn't. Ravana didn't. But some did. And those that did, they're celebrated personalities. My thoughts are going right now to Maricha. Maricha was, we'll hear, there's a whole personalities of Ramayana class dedicated to Maricha, so you'll hear this again. But he was the son of Kataka, and Kataka was a wicked personality, and he was her son. And once, along with, devouring brahmanas and defiling their yajnas and so forth, twice he had encounters with Ram. And twice he fled. One, he was sent so many miles, 800 miles, and explosions by Ram's arrow into the sea. And then later, an encounter with the cross. So he understood. And he talks to Ravana, how powerful he was. So why did Maricha, when Ravana threatened him, you don't, I'll kill you. Why Maricha, instead of turning himself into a golden deer, why did Maricha go to Panchavati and say, Ram, I surrender to you? You're the personality of Godhead. You're all powerful. Ravana is after me. Give me protection from Ravana. And Ram would have given him protection. He didn't surrender. He knew. Didn't surrender. Why? The explanation is, it's in the rest of these 17. Even one may know that surrender is an agent to bring one to that awareness of the option of surrender. Number 6. Number 2, the purpose, we'll go to 6. Dependency on the devotees of the Supreme Lord is exemplified by Shatrughna and Vibhishan. And number 3, surrender unto the Supreme Lord requires a mediator to request the Supreme Lord to bestow his mercy upon the surrendered soul and forgive for previous sins and offenses. So when Vibhishan surrendered, Hanuman was the mediator. Now, when Ram accepted the celebrated surrender, it's celebrated in Ramayana, Vibhishan surrender. It's a very big part of Ramayana, surrender. It's the Atma-Nivedana example, full surrender. When he left when he left Lanka, he just left Lanka. He left his home, he left his wife, he left his paraphernalia, he left everything. to take shelter of Lord Ramachandra. Now later his wife was restored and she became the queen and so forth. But it was his detachment and surrender and dedication of everything. When he was accepted by Ram, he was a verse, we read it. He dedicated everything. I'm yours, my everything is what's mine is yours. I'm yours, and what's mine is yours. Do it as you wish. So how did that surrender become possible? Hanuman spoke on his behalf, and when Ram finally convinced Sugriva, here, that also, he finally convinced Sugriva, don't worry, Sugriva, I understand you're concerned about my welfare, what if this, what if that, and so forth. Don't worry. Who can harm me? So many things. I can destroy all the Rakshasas and everybody, the whole of Lanka and all the Pretas and Bhutas and you name it, and the whole universe with the tip of my little finger. And I don't even need the other fingers. I don't need, so don't worry about it. Ram was revealing his divinity to Sugriva, and ultimately Sugriva accepted. Then Ram said, Sugriva, you go back to Vibhishan and convey your acceptance. The reason being, because he was the go-between. When Vibhishan first came from Ayodhya, he spoke to Sugriva. Sugriva went to Ram saying, I don't trust him, etc., etc. Now that he was convinced, Sugriva, you go back because you're the one who he submitted himself to. He accepted by you. So, someone is a theme, cardinal lesson, cardinal teaching, reminder. One requires such a person to come to the place of surrender. Item number 2. As we go along, we hear some more about these other characteristics. Sheshatvam. Sheshatvam, aspiring for Sheshatvam, or the mode of service. Having a hankering, so something that we should also think for, is personal service. Krishna, no personal service to Krishna, to a representative of Krishna, but it still is personal service to Krishna. Examples in your handout. Lakshmana implored Lord Ram, take him to the forest by saying, please make me your servant. There is nothing inappropriate in this. My purpose will be fulfilled and your need can be taken care of. So hankering for Sheshatvam, believe in the position of service. That we get the lesson, and Ram accepted. If we're going to enter into this mood of surrender, as taught in Ramayana, then a strong hankering for that opportunity for service. Lakshman told Hanuman, when they're introducing themselves to Hanuman the first time, and put the Vishnu mountain. I am his younger brother, famous by the name Lakshmana. Captivated by his qualities, I become his servant, for he is grateful and considered little acts of service to be great. So this is a lesson, cardinal lesson, teaching the mind. Hankering strongly for the opportunity for service, opportunity for service to the person of God. Characteristic number 2, of provoking yearning for liberation, Paratantriya, or service with dependency on the Lord. Both Bharat and Nocturna. When Hanuman was ready to jump, go to Lanka, he had the ability, but he wasn't neglecting his dependence. He was fully conscious of praying to Lord Ramachandra for the capacity that she already had to do the service for Ram. A dependency, a mood of dependency upon the Supreme Lord. That's the antidote to anything. Even you're capable when invokes this blessing and mercy and empowerment of the Supreme Lord to do the services. So on. You can go through this list, the 18 parts of lessons. It's inspirational. And I think what I'm going to do, because of the time, I'm going to stop here and continue tomorrow. There's many more things to say on this introductory of Ramayana and personalities of Ramayana. Let's see if there's some discussion. Now, 20 minutes. Okay. I'll be patient because it sometimes takes a little bit of time. Talking. People. There's questions, so I'll be patient and see if there's some questions.
Yes, so I was thinking, we discussed that Mother Sita, that it was mentioned in the commentaries that she was an illusory form, and at other places we hear about Vedavati's story. So are they both the two the same, or they are at different days of Brahma? Are two the same personalities? Like at one place we are saying Mother Sita is the illusory form, and the other things we also hear about it.
Different days of Brahma is the answer. Now, let's do this. In Valmiki Ramayana, you can look at your notes, one of the PDFs which says, all the different Ramayanas, that makes distinctions between them. In Valmiki, for example, in Valmiki Ramayana, there's no mention of an illusory Sita. No mention of an illusory Sita. But in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we find that Lord Chaitanya speaks of an illusory Sita. And he gets confirmation, and brings that confirmation back to the Brahmana. Just see, it was an illusory Sita. And there's different ways in which that illusory Sita appears. Some of the Ramayana, some Ramayanas say when it was time for this part of the Leela to take place, Agni came, did a switcheroo. And the original Sita was in his care, along with his wife. And then when the time came, he came from the fire, and original Sita was returned, restored, and it was the illusory Sita that had entered the fire. So, there's two possible explanations. One is different days of Brahma. And another explanation is different realizations of different personalities. Now, it's because one could reason that Valmiki Ramayana is only 24,000 verses, and that's you can't have everything if you limit it to 24,000 verses instead of 1 billion or something more. And maybe if Valmiki were to be asked, was there illusory Sita or not, he might say no, and he might say yes. This wasn't included. It was yes, it was an illusory Sita. Or the realizations of different personalities doesn't mean if the realization of this personality that's on the liberated platform, and there's direct communication with the personality. Like, what is the realization of Vyas in Srimad Bhagavatam? We take Srimad Bhagavatam to be the topmost authority. It's his realization. In Samadhi, he had some realization, and then he wrote that realization. So if someone else qualified to be in trance and has realization, it's valid. It's their realization, resting upon their devotion to the personality of Godhead. So there can be diversity on that basis, or different days of Brahma. At least, my modest look at things, I look at which renderings of Ramayana have the perfected acharyas accepted, and I accept them. And accepting them, there may be there are distinctions, like Lakshman Rekha. It's not in Valmiki Ramayana. You read this document and it's there in several others, but not in Valmiki Ramayana. It was there or wasn't there. But because they're accepted and had authorities in Ramayana, whether there was or wasn't, there wasn't. If this is, then that isn't, and that is, then this isn't. And we don't need to do that. And there, as we go, this is a question that will arise as we go along, because some people, my experience with this is, some people grew up, Indian family people grew up reading this version, and when they don't hear this version, they hear that version, they're troubled. It happens even in the text of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We came across this past week with the Chinese devotees, where in one place it says this, and another place it says that about the same set of persons. And it's within one text by Vyas. So what to speak one text to another text, from one author to another author. So, at least for me, I'm very comfortable recognizing that those forms of Ramayana or features of Ramayana that are widely accepted by the Vaishnava acharyas That there are distinctions in this one from that one is no problem. On those two bases, different days of Brahma, different realizations of different persons. Now this, for the listening audience, this is a little different. We may want to modify. I'm used to a class where there's several people in the room, and the people in the room generally have some questions, and that leaves time for the people who are remote, hearing virtually, to send something in. But it doesn't always work that way. So for us to have, if you don't want discussion, it's okay. I'll just have longer classes. You have something? Yeah. But depending upon how these morning classes go, I'll speak more and have questions less, or we'll allow nice time for discussion.
Krishna Maharaj. So, I'd really like to comment about how poetry invites layers of meaning. So, different commentators, based on their faith and realization, can have under different meanings and teachings. I'm paraphrasing. And then, subsequently, another very important statement you made was one of the primary features of Ramayana is to live a life of virtue.
Yes.
And that resonated with me because I remember hearing you speak many years ago about pastimes of King Chitraketu. And you made a very impactful statement that Srimad Bhagavatam is not about ethical behavior, but it's about transcendental behavior. So I was hoping you could elaborate on virtue versus ethical behavior.
Well, virtue and ethical behavior can be synonymous. Often they are. Those who are virtuous follow ethics, and those that follow ethics are virtuous. They're interchangeable terminologies. Now, the commentary, the verses of the Bhagavatam and the commentary on the Bhagavatam both make it very clear that the personality of Godhead is the personality of Godhead. And it's less clear in Ramayana, and therefore its purpose or its function is slightly different. That is to say, like Mahabharata, emphasis is on virtue. Good guys and the bad guys. The cops and the robbers. The non-virtuous, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Those who abide by Dharma, those that don't. Now, so virtue and ethical life go together. But then the Bhagavatam specifically, there's emphasis on not just virtue, but transcendental life, coming to the stage of absorption in the personality of Godhead. Now, you look at this image that's on the screen, and it's a treatise of surrender, and for those who are Sri Vaishnavas in particular, or those who are Vaishnavas that aren't Sri Vaishnavas, that love Ramayana, it's all about surrender. Along with, so the path of virtue is an asset to the life of surrender. And when there's a life of surrender, then virtue isn't going to be compromised because of the surrender. Under any circumstance, virtue is not going to be compromised because of the strength of Bhagavad Bhakti. Now there's a number of places in not exactly your question, but the number of places in Ramayana where it seems that, lower nature, Lakshman gets angry, for example, and Ram, speak virtue, and he calms down. Things like that. And sometimes it works even the other way. Lakshman is to say something to Ram. So, but it's, the net result is attachment to Ram, and the net result is also attachment to virtue. Now, your specific question is making a comparison between the two, the life of the virtue and the life of ethical living. What's the word you used? They're quite similar. And then there's transcendental ethics and transcendental virtue. Okay, we have a few minutes. Any question online? No? Okay. I'll take the 6 minutes. Let's go back. 18 cardinal lessons from Ramayana. Ten. Oh, 8, 9. 8. An acharya, Hanuman, the Sundarakanda, is required to guide the devotee to surrender to the Lord. Hanuman plays, it's strongly emphasized in commentaries on Ramayana that Hanuman's function, besides being a warrior, Hanuman's function is the function of an acharya. He does it again, and he does different things. He does, mediation and being go-between and so forth. But he's an acharya. He reminds those who forget Lord Ramachandra to remember Ramachandra and be fixed at the lotus feet of Lord Ramachandra. He does it again and again, and again and again. Specific to Sita, I'll mention this. He's the acharya for Sita, because according to the Sri Vaishnava acharyas, Sita is the goddess of fortune, the internal potency of the personality of Godhead. He is the eternal consort. However, the role in Ramayana that she plays when she desires something separate from the happiness of Lord Ram, which is, oh, see that golden deer, let's get that golden deer. Can you get it for me? No, it's not about serving Ram, it's about her pleasures. From that point, she's playing the role of a deviated soul. And that causes a problem. And then she has to be rescued. And Hanuman is the rescuer on behalf of Lord Ramachandra. And there's a whole explanation of all the events that lead up to Hanuman rescuing, finding Sita, consoling Sita, etc., etc., etc. There's the heroism, certainly, but it's the guru function, the acharya function. He has all the credentials, the evaluation of Ram, what are his credentials, the recognition by Sugriva of his credential, Ram giving him the ring, that signifying the empowerment to be successful in restoring this errant living entity back to Ram's shelter. Guru or acharya function. And it's necessary in the process of surrender. As the case with Maricha, he didn't have any association with Hanuman. He didn't come to surrender, although he knew from first-hand experience how powerful it was. It was really simple. Would have been a different story if when he went to Panchavati, he said, Ram, Ravana's going to kill me. And you're all powerful. Please protect me. Be in your service. Number 9. A person who is eligible to surrender unto the Lord in the above manner should engage in devotional service and full surrender on a daily basis and wait for the time his body falls dead. Shabari is a wonderful temple. Jatayu is a temple. Stay always engaged in the Lord's service, and you will go to him. That's the Sharanagata, one who is engaged in Sharanagati. And sadhaka on the path of Sharanagati should be dutiful, like Ram, and not be whimsical and uncontrolled in senses like Ravana. So it's nice. You have these handouts are useful for you to understand the context of Ramayana. I think tomorrow morning I'll make some additional points on this principle of surrender, and we'll cover another topic that's very important for understanding the personalities of Ramayana and the flow of Ramayana. I'll see you again tomorrow morning. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki